The morning sun broke through the clouds over London, casting a golden glow across Westminster Abbey. Inside the palace walls, Kate Middleton stood before an ornate mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the delicate tiara resting on her perfectly styled hair. Today was unlike any other day in her life. Today her husband would be crowned King of England, and she would become Queen Consort. The weight of history pressed down on her shoulders, yet she maintained the composed expression the world had come to expect from her. Behind her, stylists moved quietly, making final adjustments to her ivory gown. The dress had been designed months ago, every stitch carrying meaning, every detail approved by palace officials. Kate caught her reflection and barely recognized herself. She looked regal, powerful, almost untouchable, but inside she was still the girl from Berkshire who had fallen in love with a prince at university. She wondered if that girl would even believe this moment was real. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened, and there stood William. Even after all these years, the sight of him still made her heart skip. He wore the full ceremonial robes, crimson velvet trimmed with ermine, and carried himself with the dignity his position demanded. But his eyes, those familiar blue eyes, held the same nervousness she felt. They had been preparing for this day their entire married lives, yet nothing could truly prepare someone for becoming monarch. William crossed the room and took her hands in his. Neither spoke for a moment. Words seemed inadequate for what they were about to experience together. The ceremony would last hours, watched by billions around the world. Every gesture would be analyzed, every expression photographed and debated. Their children would walk behind them, thrust into a spotlight neither parent had wanted for them so soon. George, at just 10 years old, would have to carry himself like a future king. Charlotte would need to remember every lesson in deportment she had learned. And little Louis, barely 5, would somehow have to sit still through endless rituals he could not possibly understand. Kate squeezed William's hands. She thought about the journey that had brought them here. The years of dating under intense media scrutiny, their brief breakup that had broken her heart, the magical proposal in Kenya, their fairy tale wedding that the world had celebrated. Then the children came, 3 beautiful souls who had completed their family. She had learned to navigate royal life, to balance being a mother with being a future queen. She had made mistakes, faced criticism, endured comparisons to Diana that cut deep, but she had persevered, grown stronger, and earned the respect of a nation. Now the stakes were infinitely higher. William would no longer be the Prince of Wales waiting in the wings. He would be king, the head of state, the symbol of continuity for an ancient institution, and she would stand beside him, supporting him, representing the modern face of a centuries-old monarchy. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. A gentle tap at the door signaled it was time. Kate took a deep breath, smoothing down her gown one final time. William offered his arm, and she took it, drawing strength from his presence. They walked together through the palace corridors, their footsteps echoing on marble floors. Staff members bowed as they passed, their faces reflecting pride and emotion. Some had tears in their eyes. This was not just a coronation for William and Kate. It was a moment of transition for everyone who served the crown, a turning of the page in British history. They reached the room where their children waited. George stood tall in his formal attire, trying so hard to look brave despite the anxiety visible in his young face. Charlotte looked like a miniature princess, her dress a smaller version of her mother's, her expression serious and determined. And Louis, sweet Louis, fidgeted with his collar, his eyes wide as he took in the grandeur around him. Kate knelt down, mindful of her gown, and spoke softly to her youngest son, reassuring him that everything would be all right. The family gathered together, a private moment before the world's eyes would be upon them. William placed a hand on George's shoulder, offering silent encouragement to the boy who would one day face his own coronation. Kate held Charlotte's hand, remembering her own daughter's words from the night before, when Charlotte had asked if being a princess meant she always had to be perfect. Kate had told her that being royal meant being human, being kind, and always trying their best. She hoped Charlotte would remember that today. The sound of trumpets filtered through the walls. The ceremony was beginning. Outside, thousands of people lined the streets, waving flags and cheering. Inside the abbey, dignitaries from around the world had gathered, representatives of nations and faiths, all there to witness this historic moment. The cameras were ready, the commentators prepared, and the ancient rituals about to unfold. Kate felt William's hand find hers again. She looked at her husband, soon to be king, and saw not the weight of the crown but the man she loved. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever scrutiny they would face, whatever sacrifices would be required, they would face it together. Their family would remain their anchor, their love, their strength. A palace official appeared, giving the final signal. It was time to leave the private quarters and enter history. Kate straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and prepared to walk the path that had been laid out before her. The girl from Berkshire was gone now, transformed into something greater. She was ready. They were all ready. The doors opened, and the Cambridge family stepped forward into their destiny, unaware of the emotional moments that awaited them at Westminster Abbey, moments that would touch hearts across the globe and define their reign for generations to come. The carriage ride through London felt surreal. Kate sat beside William, their children positioned carefully across from them, and watched as thousands upon thousands of people pressed against the barriers lining the streets. The roar of the crowd penetrated even the thick walls of the golden state coach, a continuous wave of sound that seemed to vibrate through Kate's entire body. Flags waved frantically, Union Jacks mixing with homemade signs declaring love and support. People had camped overnight for this moment, traveled from distant corners of the kingdom and beyond, all to catch a glimpse of history. Charlotte pressed her face to the window, her earlier nervousness momentarily forgotten in the wonder of seeing so many people. George sat with practiced stillness, though Kate noticed his fingers tapping nervously against his knee. Louis bounced slightly in his seat, his excitement barely contained. William caught Kate's eye and smiled, a genuine smile that reminded her why she had fallen in love with him all those years ago. Despite the enormous pressure, despite the weight of expectation, he could still find moments of joy in their children's wonder. The coach turned a corner, and Westminster Abbey came into view. The ancient building stood majestic against the sky, its Gothic towers reaching heavenward. Kate had been inside many times before, attended services and ceremonies, but today it looked different. Today it would become the setting for one of the most significant moments in modern British history. Scaffolding and camera equipment surrounded the entrance, and she could see the glint of lenses pointed in their direction, ready to capture every second of their arrival. As the carriage slowed, Kate felt her heartbeat quicken. This was it. The moment they had rehearsed, planned, and prepared for was finally here. She glanced down at her hands, surprised to find them steady. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the nerves and anticipation, she found a core of calm. She had trained for this role her entire adult life. She had learned from the best, studied the protocols, understood the expectations. More importantly, she had grown into herself, discovered her own voice and purpose within the constraints of royal life. The carriage came to a stop. Outside, she could hear the military band playing, the sound crisp and precise. Palace officials moved into position, ready to assist the family's exit. William looked at each of his children in turn, his expression conveying both love and expectation. They had talked about this day as a family, prepared the children as best they could for what they would experience. Now it was time to see if those preparations would hold. The door opened and the noise from the crowd intensified. William stepped out first as protocol demanded. Kate watched him descend the steps, his movements graceful despite the heavy robes. Then it was her turn. She gathered her gown, mindful of the train that would follow her, and emerged into the daylight. The roar that greeted her was deafening, overwhelming in its intensity. Thousands of voices merged into a single expression of celebration and support. Camera flashes created a strobe effect that made her blink. She maintained her composure, offering the slight smile that had become her signature, neither too enthusiastic nor too reserved. George came next, and Kate felt a surge of maternal pride watching her eldest son handle the moment with such maturity. He was so young to bear such responsibility, yet he carried himself with a dignity that spoke to the careful preparation he had received. Charlotte followed, her small hand gripping the side of the carriage as she navigated the steps in her formal gown, and finally Louis, whose face split into a huge grin when he saw the crowds. Kate had to suppress a smile at his uninhibited joy. Let him be a child for as long as possible, she thought. The weight of duty would come soon enough. The family assembled at the base of the steps leading into the abbey. Kate reached down and straightened Charlotte's dress, a motherly gesture that photographers captured from every angle. William rested his hand briefly on George's shoulder. For just a moment, they were simply a family, parents and children sharing an extraordinary experience together. Then the officials signaled and they began the procession into the abbey. The interior was breathtaking. Every surface seemed to glow with candlelight, reflecting off gold and jewels and ancient stonework. The pews were filled with faces from around the world: kings and queens, presidents and prime ministers, religious leaders and military commanders. All eyes turned as the family entered, and Kate felt the weight of those gazes. She kept her focus forward, her training taking over, guiding each step down the long aisle toward the altar where the archbishop waited. Music swelled around them, a choir of voices so pure and powerful that Kate felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, knowing the cameras would catch any show of emotion. But the beauty of the moment was undeniable. This was more than pageantry and tradition. This was the continuation of a story that stretched back over 1,000 years, a living connection between past and future. And somehow, miraculously, she and her family were now central to that story. They reached their designated positions. George would sit near the front, old enough to have an official role in the ceremony. Charlotte and Louis would be positioned where they could see, but also where attendants could quietly assist if needed. Kate would have her own moment later, when William placed the consort's crown upon her head. But for now she stood slightly to the side, watching as her husband prepared to take the oath that would transform him from prince to king. The archbishop began speaking, his voice resonant in the cavernous space. William's responses were clear and strong, each word carefully enunciated. Kate found herself thinking about all the kings who had stood in this exact spot before him, speaking these same words, making these same promises. Some had been great rulers, others had failed. Some had been beloved, others reviled. What kind of king would William be? What kind of queen would she become? Only time would answer those questions. As the ceremony progressed through its ancient rituals, Kate noticed little things that the cameras might miss. The way George sat perfectly still, his face serious with concentration. The way Charlotte's eyes widened when the crown jewels were brought forward. The way Louis struggled to stay quiet but managed, understanding in his childlike way that this was important. Her children were being so brave, so good. She felt a fierce surge of love and protection toward them. Then came the moment everyone had waited for. The archbishop lifted the heavy crown, the symbol of sovereignty that had crowned kings and queens for generations. The abbey fell into profound silence. Even the breathing of hundreds of people seemed to pause. William bowed his head and the crown was placed upon it. The weight of that crown, Kate knew, was more than physical. It represented duty, sacrifice, service. It represented the hopes and expectations of millions. And as William raised his head, crowned and transformed, Kate saw in his face both the burden and the acceptance of what he had become. The moment the crown settled onto William's head, something shifted in the atmosphere of Westminster Abbey. It was as if the building itself recognized the significance of what had just occurred. Kate watched her husband, now officially king, as he rose from the coronation chair. His face showed a mixture of emotions, pride and humility, strength and vulnerability. She knew him well enough to see past the formal expression to the real man underneath, the one who had confided his fears to her in the quiet hours of the night, who had wondered if he could live up to the legacy of his grandmother and the memory of his mother. The archbishop turned toward Kate, and her heart began to race. Her own moment had arrived. She stepped forward, her gown rustling softly against the ancient stone floor. Attendants moved to adjust her train, ensuring it lay perfectly as she approached the altar. This was her transformation, her own crossing from one identity to another. No longer would she be the Duchess of Cambridge, the prince's wife. She would be queen, a title that carried its own expectations and responsibilities. As she knelt, Kate caught sight of Charlotte watching intently from her seat. Her daughter's eyes were wide, absorbing every detail of her mother's crowning. Kate wanted to convey so much in that moment, to somehow telegraph to her daughter that strength and grace could coexist, that tradition and modernity need not be at odds, that a woman could be both powerful and compassionate. But there was no time for such communications. The ceremony moved forward with its predetermined rhythm, centuries of protocol guiding each action. The consort's crown was lighter than the monarch's, but Kate still felt its weight as it was placed upon her head. The metal was cold against her temples, and for a brief moment she felt dizzy with the enormity of it all. Then William's eyes met hers across the short distance, and she found her center again. They were in this together, partners in an extraordinary journey. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else, united and committed to their duty and to each other. The choir's voices rose again, filling the abbey with sound so beautiful it seemed almost otherworldly. Kate remained still, every muscle trained to hold her position despite the discomfort of kneeling on stone. She thought about all the queens who had worn this crown before her, women who had navigated the complexities of court life, who had raised children in the public eye, who had balanced personal desires against public duty. She felt connected to them across the centuries, part of an unbroken chain of women who had stood beside kings. When she was finally allowed to rise, Kate felt different. It was not just the crown on her head or the title she now held. Something internal had shifted, a final acceptance of the role she had been moving toward for years. She was no longer becoming queen, she was queen. The distinction seemed subtle but felt profound. As she took her place beside William on the throne that had been set up for her, she saw her reflection in a polished shield held by one of the ceremonial guards. The woman looking back at her appeared regal, composed, ready. George was called forward for his part in the ceremony. Kate's heart clenched as she watched her young son walk toward them, his steps measured and careful. He had been coached extensively, but he was still just a child carrying an enormous burden. As the eldest son of the monarch, he was now officially the heir to the throne. One day, many years in the future, he would go through this same ritual, would feel this same weight. Kate wanted to spare him that pressure, to let him just be a boy for longer. But duty did not wait for childhood to end. Her son performed his role flawlessly, speaking the words he had memorized, bowing at the appropriate moments. Kate saw William's face soften with pride and something else, perhaps recognition of his own younger self in his son. When George returned to his seat, Charlotte reached over and squeezed his hand, a small gesture of sibling support that the cameras caught. Later, that image would be shared millions of times, a reminder that beneath the crowns and ceremony, they were still a family. The ceremony continued through its prescribed elements, each ritual loaded with symbolism. Swords were presented, oaths were taken, blessings were given. Kate remained focused, aware that her every expression was being recorded for history. She thought about how these images would be viewed decades from now, perhaps centuries from now, and tried to embody the dignity and grace she hoped people would remember. But maintaining that composure became increasingly difficult as the emotion of the moment built. When the congregation rose to sing the national anthem, now addressing William as king, Kate felt tears threatening again. The sound of thousands of voices united in song, the weight of tradition, the magnitude of change, it all overwhelmed her careful control. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall, but her throat tightened with suppressed emotion. Beside her, William seemed similarly affected. His jaw was set, his eyes bright. They had shared so much together, faced such scrutiny and pressure, and now they had reached this pinnacle. Kate remembered their wedding day, how nervous they had both been, how the future had seemed full of possibility but also uncertainty. They had weathered storms since then, personal and public. They had grown individually and as a couple. And now here they stood, crowned and consecrated, ready to lead. As the ceremony moved toward its conclusion, Kate allowed herself a moment to truly look at the assembled guests. There were faces she recognized, dignitaries she had met at state functions, distant relatives who rarely appeared except for major occasions. There were also people she did not know, representatives of organizations and charities, citizens chosen to witness this historic event. All of them had dressed in their finest clothes, traveled to London, waited for hours, all to be part of this moment. The responsibility of living up to their expectations felt crushing. The Archbishop raised his hands in final blessing, and Kate bowed her head. She offered a silent prayer, asking for wisdom and strength, for patience with her children as they navigated their new lives, for guidance in the challenges ahead. She prayed to be worthy of the crown she now wore, to serve with humility and dedication, to make a positive difference in the lives of the people she was now sworn to represent. When she raised her head, The ceremony was officially complete. William was king, she was queen, and their lives had fundamentally changed forever. The trumpet sounded, a triumphant blast that seemed to shake the ancient walls. Slowly, with measured dignity, the newly crowned monarchs rose from their thrones. Kate adjusted her crown, feeling its unfamiliar presence, and took William's offered arm. Together they began the processional walk back down the aisle, their children falling into step behind them. The crowd inside the abbey erupted into applause, a break from strict protocol that spoke to the genuine emotion of the moment. Kate kept her eyes forward, but she could feel the energy of the celebration washing over her. People were standing, some wiping away tears, others beaming with joy. The cameras flashed continuously, creating a constellation of lights that followed their progress. With each step, Kate felt herself settling into her new reality, accepting the weight of the crown and the responsibility it represented. The hardest part was over. The ceremony was complete. Now came the real work of being queen. Stepping out of Westminster Abbey into the afternoon light felt like emerging from a dream. The noise that greeted them was thunderous, a wall of sound composed of cheers, applause, music, and celebration. Kate paused at the top of the steps, William beside her, and took in the scene before them. The streets were a sea of people, flags waving, faces turned upward, phones and cameras held high to capture the moment. This was real. This was happening. They were king and queen, and an entire nation was celebrating their coronation. William squeezed her hand briefly before releasing it, a small private gesture in the midst of very public spectacle. They began descending the steps toward the waiting carriage, moving slowly to allow the photographers time to capture their images. Kate could hear the commentators speaking, their voices barely audible over the crowd noise but steady in their descriptions of the historic moment. She wondered what they were saying about her, about the family, about what this day meant for Britain. George, Charlotte, and Louis emerged behind them, and the crowd's cheers somehow grew even louder. The children were favorites with the public, their youth and innocence providing a softer counterpoint to the formal dignity of their parents. Kate glanced back to check on them, her maternal instincts never fully switched off even in the midst of ceremony. Charlotte was handling the attention with remarkable composure, while Louis looked somewhat overwhelmed but was managing. George walked with his shoulders back, already understanding that his every move was being watched and judged. The return carriage ride would be longer than their arrival, taking them through more of London's streets so more people could share in the celebration. As they settled into the ornate coach, Kate finally allowed herself to relax slightly. The ceremony was complete. They had managed it without any major mishaps. The children had been wonderfully behaved. Now they could simply enjoy the celebration, wave to the crowds, and savor this once-in-a-lifetime experience. Louis immediately pressed his face to the carriage window, delighted by all the people. Charlotte sat more demurely, but was clearly fascinated by the spectacle. George seemed thoughtful, perhaps processing all that had just occurred. Kate watched her children experiencing this historic moment and felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in how well they had handled themselves, concern about the pressure they would face going forward, determination to protect their childhoods as much as possible despite their very public roles. The carriage rolled slowly through streets lined 10 deep with celebrating crowds. People had painted their faces with Union Jacks dressed in red, white, and blue, brought British flags of every size. Some held signs with messages of congratulations and support. Others simply smiled and waved, caught up in the joy of the occasion. Kate waved back, making eye contact when possible, trying to convey her gratitude for their presence and support. These were the people she and William would serve, and their enthusiasm touched her deeply. William leaned close and murmured something in her ear, commenting on the extraordinary turnout. Kate nodded, equally amazed by how many people had come out to celebrate. In an age of declining monarchies and republican movements, this display of public support for the crown was both heartening and humbling. It reminded her why they had accepted this burden, why the institution they represented still mattered to so many people. As they passed through different neighborhoods, Kate noticed how the character of the crowds changed. In some areas, the celebration was boisterous and loud, with people dancing in the streets. In others, it was more reserved but no less genuine, with respectful applause and quiet smiles. London's diversity was on full display. People from all backgrounds united in marking this historic moment. It reinforced for Kate the importance of being a monarch for all people, not just some. Charlotte suddenly pointed out the window, excited by something she had seen. Kate looked and saw a group of children around her daughter's age, dressed in matching outfits and waving homemade crowns. Charlotte waved enthusiastically at them, delighted to see other children participating in the celebration. The interaction was captured by cameras and would later become one of the most shared moments of the day, a reminder that despite her title, Charlotte was still a little girl who enjoyed connecting with her peers. The journey continued through the city, each street revealing new displays of celebration. Kate tried to take in every detail, knowing she would want to remember this day for the rest of her life. The flowers adorning lampposts, the banners stretched across buildings, the creative signs and costumes people had made. Someone had gone to enormous effort to organize all of this, and the result was spectacular. London had never looked more beautiful or more celebratory. Louis started to get restless, his earlier good behavior wearing thin after hours of sitting still. Kate distracted him by pointing out interesting things in the crowd, turning the carriage ride into a game of spotting the most creative costumes or signs. William joined in, and soon all three children were engaged, their laughter filling the carriage. For a few moments they were just a normal family enjoying an outing together, the weight of their titles temporarily forgotten. As they approached Buckingham Palace, Kate felt a flutter of anticipation. The traditional balcony appearance awaited them, perhaps the most iconic moment of any coronation. Millions would be watching around the world as they stepped out to greet the crowds gathered at the palace gates. It would be their first appearance as king and queen in this setting, a symbolic gesture that had been repeated countless times throughout history, but would today have special significance. The carriage passed through the palace gates, and the crowd outside erupted into fresh cheers. The noise was incredible, echoing off the palace walls. Kate could see faces pressed against the gates, people who had secured prime viewing positions and were now witnessing the culmination of their long wait. The carriage rolled to a stop and palace staff moved forward to open the doors and assist their exit. Stepping down from the carriage, Kate felt the full weight of her crown for the first time since leaving the Abbey. Her neck was starting to ache from holding it steady, and she realized with some amusement that this was a problem queens throughout history had faced. Beauty and duty often came with physical discomfort, but complaining was not an option. She straightened her posture, adjusted her expression into the now familiar public smile, and prepared for the next phase of this extraordinary day. The family was ushered inside through private corridors, away from the public areas where staff and guests were celebrating. Kate was grateful for a few moments of relative privacy before the balcony appearance. Charlotte complained that her shoes hurt, and Kate knelt to check them, adjusting the straps while murmuring reassurance. Louis asked if he could take off his jacket now, and William patiently explained that they needed to stay in full regalia just a little longer. George stood quietly watching his younger siblings, his expression suggesting he felt very grown up in comparison. A palace official appeared to brief them on the timing of the balcony appearance. The crowds outside were enormous, he explained, perhaps the largest gathering the palace had ever seen. When they stepped out, the reaction would be intense. He reminded the children to wave, to smile, and to remember that people around the world would be watching. Kate appreciated his gentle approach, providing necessary guidance without adding to the pressure the children already felt. They moved toward the balcony doors, and Kate could hear the roar of the crowd outside even through the thick walls. Her heart began to race again, that familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement. This was the moment people had been waiting for, the ceremonial conclusion to the coronation day. Whatever happened in the years ahead, this moment would be preserved in history, photographs of them on that balcony becoming iconic images associated with the beginning of William's reign. The doors to the balcony opened, and the sound that rushed in was unlike anything Kate had experienced before. It was not just noise, but a physical force, a wave of collective emotion from hundreds of thousands of voices united in celebration. She took a deep breath, feeling William's presence beside her as they stepped forward together into the view of the massive crowd gathered before Buckingham Palace. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The cheering intensified, becoming almost painful in its volume. Kate's eyes swept across the sea of people stretching as far as she could see down the mall, packed shoulder to shoulder, faces upturned toward the balcony. Flags waved frantically, creating ripples of red, white, and blue through the crowd. Some people were crying, overcome with emotion. Others were laughing and cheering, caught up in the joy of the moment. The energy was palpable, electric, almost tangible in the air. Kate began to wave, that practiced royal wave she had perfected over years of public appearances. Beside her, William did the same, his face showing genuine pleasure at the crowd's enthusiasm. Behind them, she heard the children being encouraged to wave as well. She glanced back and saw Charlotte and Louis doing their best, their small hands moving back and forth. George stood tall, his wave more measured, already understanding the dignity expected of him. The official photographer was somewhere in the crowd below, Kate knew, capturing images that would define this day. She was conscious of how she looked, the angle of her head, the expression on her face, but she also felt genuine emotion swelling within her. These people had come to celebrate their family, to mark this moment in British history. Their presence was a gift, a show of support that meant more than Kate could adequately express. William turned to her, and for a moment their eyes met. In that brief exchange, Kate saw everything they had been through reflected back at her. The years of preparation, the challenges overcome, the love that had sustained them. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, and she smiled back. The cameras would capture that moment too, and people would analyze it, debate what it meant, but Kate knew the truth. It was simply two people who loved each other sharing an extraordinary moment. The children were invited to step forward, and the crowd's enthusiasm reached new heights. People adored seeing the young royals, and George, Charlotte, and Louis did not disappoint. Charlotte waved with particular enthusiasm, clearly enjoying the attention. Louis tried to copy his sister but got distracted by something in the crowd, pointing and tugging on his father's sleeve. George maintained his composure, though Kate noticed him sneaking glances at his parents for reassurance. A formation of military aircraft appeared in the distance, and the crowd's attention shifted skyward. The flypast had been carefully coordinated, a display of Britain's military might and precision. Kate watched as the planes drew closer, their formation perfect against the clear blue sky. The roar of engines added to the cacophony of sound already filling the air. Trails of colored smoke began to stream behind the aircraft, painting the sky in red, white, and blue. As the planes passed directly overhead, Kate felt the vibration in her chest. Louis pressed against her side, simultaneously thrilled and slightly intimidated by the noise. Charlotte stood on her toes, trying to see every detail. George watched with fascination, his earlier nervousness forgotten in the excitement of the aerial display. Kate put her arm around Louis, holding him close, wanting him to feel safe even in the midst of all this overwhelming spectacle. The flypast continued for several minutes, wave after wave of aircraft in various formations. Each new group elicited fresh cheers from the crowd. Kate found herself genuinely enjoying the display, temporarily able to forget the weight of her crown and simply appreciate the skill and pageantry before her. William pointed out different aircraft to George, using the moment as a teaching opportunity even in the midst of ceremony. When the last plane disappeared from view, the crowd's attention returned to the balcony. Kate knew they would be expected to remain visible for a while longer, to give people time to take photographs and feel they had truly seen the newly crowned monarchs. She continued waving, varying her gestures to different sections of the crowd, trying to make as many people as possible feel acknowledged. A group of people near the front of the crowd had brought a large banner reading, "Long live the King and Queen." Kate pointed it out to William, touched by the sentiment. Throughout the crowd, she could see similar messages of support and congratulation. Some were elaborate, clearly the product of hours of work. Others were simple but heartfelt. All of them represented people taking time to celebrate their monarchy, and Kate felt humbled by that dedication. Charlotte tugged on Kate's gown, asking in a whisper how much longer they would stay on the balcony. Kate knelt down to her daughter's level, mindful that this interaction was being photographed from every angle. She spoke quietly, explaining that they needed to wave a little longer, that all these people had come to see them and deserved their attention. Charlotte nodded, understanding even if she was getting tired, and returned to waving with renewed effort. The moment of kneeling allowed Kate to briefly rest her neck, which was aching from the weight of the crown. She took the opportunity to adjust her posture, straighten her gown, and gather her energy for the remaining time on the balcony. Being queen, she was learning, required physical stamina as much as emotional strength. Every appearance demanded holding uncomfortable positions, wearing restrictive clothing, and smiling through fatigue. Standing again, Kate noticed movement in the crowd. Someone had fainted, overcome by heat or emotion or the press of bodies. Security personnel were moving to help, creating a small bubble of space around the person. It reminded Kate of the real people behind the spectacle, individuals who had sacrificed comfort and convenience to be here. Some had camped overnight, gone without food or bathroom facilities, endured hours of waiting, all for these few moments of celebration. Their commitment deserved recognition. William had noticed the commotion too, and Kate saw concern cross his face. He spoke briefly to an aide, presumably asking for confirmation that the person was being properly cared for. It was a small gesture that most of the crowd would never know about, but it spoke to the kind of king he wanted to be, one who noticed when individuals needed help even in the midst of crowds. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting a golden glow across the gathered masses. The light caught on the crowns, on Kate's jewels, on the palace's white facade, creating a scene of almost magical beauty. Kate tried to imprint the image in her memory, knowing she would want to remember exactly how this moment looked and felt. The energy of the crowd, the presence of her family, the weight of history, the hope for the future, it all combined into something transcendent. Louis started to get genuinely restless, his patience exhausted after the long day. He fidgeted with his collar again, shifted his weight from foot to foot, and looked pleadingly at his mother. Kate understood completely. He was only 5 years old, and he had been remarkably well-behaved for hours. She caught William's eye and nodded toward Louis. They both understood it was nearly time to end the balcony appearance. William signaled to the palace official standing just inside the doorway. A few more minutes, the official indicated. Kate bent down once more to Louis, whispering encouragement and promising him they would go inside very soon. She asked him to be brave just a little longer, to wave one more time for all the people who had come to see them. Louis, to his credit, straightened up and began waving again with renewed effort, determined to make his mother proud. The final minutes on the balcony stretched out, each second feeling longer than the last. Kate's face was starting to hurt from maintaining her smile. Her arm ached from waving, and the crown felt impossibly heavy. Yet she knew these discomforts were minor compared to the significance of the moment. Generations from now, people would look back on this day, on these images, as marking the beginning of a new era in British monarchy. She wanted to represent that era well. Finally, the signal came that they could withdraw. Kate felt relief wash over her, though she was careful not to let it show on her face. They waved one final time, all 5 of them together, a family united in service and purpose. The crowd cheered with undiminished enthusiasm, their energy seemingly endless. Then slowly and with proper dignity, the royal family turned and walked back through the balcony doors into the relative quiet of the palace. The moment the doors closed behind them, the atmosphere changed completely. The roar of the crowd became muffled, and the formal tension that had held them all together began to dissolve. Louis immediately asked if he could take off his jacket, and this time William agreed. Charlotte kicked off her shoes with obvious relief, not caring that this was decidedly unroyal behavior. George allowed himself to slump slightly, the rigid posture he had maintained all day finally relaxing. Kate reached up and carefully removed her crown, feeling immediate relief as the weight lifted from her head. Her hair was flattened where the crown had pressed, and she tried to fluff it back into shape. William had already removed his own crown, and Kate was struck by how much younger he suddenly looked without it. The crowns had transformed them into monarchs, but removing them revealed the real people underneath. Tired parents who had just survived an incredibly demanding day. Staff members appeared with refreshments, and Kate gratefully accepted a glass of water. She had not realized how thirsty she was until that moment. The children were offered juice and biscuits, which they accepted eagerly. For a few minutes, the family simply stood together in the corridor, decompressing from the intensity of the public appearances. No one spoke much. They were all processing what they had just experienced, what had just changed in their lives. Kate looked at William and saw exhaustion in his face, but also something else. Satisfaction, perhaps, or relief that the ceremony had gone well. He had carried himself with such dignity throughout the day, never faltering despite the enormous pressure. She felt a surge of love and admiration for him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, She knew they would face them together, partners in every sense of the word. A palace official approached, reminding them that there were still more events scheduled for the evening. A formal reception, photographs with visiting dignitaries, a private dinner with family members who had attended the ceremony. The day was far from over. Kate suppressed a sigh, gathered her energy, and prepared to continue. This was her life now, an endless series of duties and appearances, each one requiring the same level of composure and grace. She had chosen this path, accepted this role, and she would fulfill it to the best of her ability. But first she knelt down to her children one more time, gathering them close in a brief group embrace. This was why she did it, she reminded herself. For them, for their future, for the institution they represented. George, Charlotte, and Louis hugged her back, their small arms tight around her neck. In that moment, Kate was not queen. She was simply a mother who loved her children and wanted them to know it, crowns and ceremonies notwithstanding. The evening reception was held in the palace's grandest ballroom, a space that seemed to glow with candlelight and gold leaf. Kate had changed into a different gown, still formal but less restrictive than the coronation dress. The crown remained on her head, however. Protocol demanded that she wear it throughout the official celebrations, and she was learning to adjust to its constant presence. Her neck muscles were developing what she suspected would become a permanent ache, part of the physical cost of her new role. Dignitaries from around the world filled the ballroom, each waiting for their moment to offer congratulations to the newly crowned king and queen. Kate stood beside William, her face arranged in the pleasant expression she had perfected as an endless line of people approached. Kings and queens from other nations, presidents and prime ministers, religious leaders and military commanders, all came forward to shake hands and exchange polite words. Kate's mind swam with trying to remember everyone's names and titles, their country's current political situation, the appropriate topics of conversation. Some interactions were easier than others. Fellow European royals understood the unique pressures of their position and offered genuine sympathy alongside congratulations. Kate found comfort in these brief exchanges with people who truly understood what she was experiencing. They had been through their own coronations or would face them someday. They knew the weight of the crown was more than metaphorical. Their words of encouragement meant more than the polite platitudes of politicians. Between greeting guests, Kate kept an eye on her children. George, Charlotte, and Louis had been allowed to attend the early part of the reception before being taken to the private quarters. She watched as Charlotte performed a perfect curtsy to a visiting queen, her earlier training evident. Louis tried to copy his sister but got tangled up and nearly fell, saved only by George's quick hand on his shoulder. The visiting queen laughed kindly, charmed by the children's efforts. It was a reminder that even in this formal setting, they were still learning, still growing into their roles. When the children were finally taken upstairs by their nanny, Kate felt torn. Part of her wanted to go with them, to tuck them into bed and hear about their feelings regarding this momentous day. But duty required her presence at the reception, smiling and conversing, representing the new reign. She watched them leave, Charlotte waving a tired goodbye, Louis already drooping with exhaustion, George walking with the careful steps of someone trying not to show how tired he truly was. Her heart ached with missing them even as they disappeared from view. The evening wore on and Kate's smile became more fixed. Her feet hurt in the formal shoes, her gown felt too tight, and the crown seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. Yet she maintained her composure, engaging with each guest as if they were the only person in the room. She asked about their countries, their families, their impressions of the ceremony. She laughed at appropriate moments, looked solemn when discussions turned serious, and always remained aware of the photographers circling the room. William was handling his own stream of guests nearby, and occasionally Kate caught his eye. They would exchange a brief look that communicated volumes. Exhaustion certainly, but also shared experience, mutual support, and the knowledge that they were surviving this together. Those glances became lifelines throughout the evening, small moments of connection in a sea of strangers and formal obligations. A particularly long conversation with a visiting president tested Kate's patience. The man seemed determined to discuss every aspect of British politics, offering unsolicited advice on everything from economic policy to foreign relations. Kate responded with diplomatic non-answers, carefully avoiding any statements that could be construed as political positions. The Queen must remain above politics, neutral and unbiased. It was a rule she had learned early and followed carefully, even when faced with people determined to elicit opinions from her. Finally, the official reception began to wind down. Guests started to depart, offering final congratulations as they left. Kate's face felt frozen in its smile, and she wondered if she would ever be able to relax her expression again. The ballroom slowly emptied, the noise level dropping, and Kate felt exhaustion crashing over her in waves. She had been running on adrenaline for hours, but now that the immediate demands were lessening, her body was demanding rest. A smaller, private dinner was held for close family members who had participated in the ceremony.
Kate's parents were there, looking simultaneously proud and overwhelmed by all they had witnessed.
Her siblings attended as well, and Kate was grateful for the presence of people who had known her before she was royal, who remembered the girl from Berkshire who had never imagined this future. William's relatives filled out the guest list, aunts and uncles and cousins who had supported them through the years. The dinner conversation was more relaxed than the formal reception, though still governed by protocol and awareness that staff were present. Kate's mother leaned over at one point and whispered how proud she was, how beautifully Kate had handled herself throughout the day. Kate felt tears prick her eyes at this simple maternal approval. Despite everything, despite the crown and the title and the historic significance, she was still her mother's daughter, still wanting and needing that parental affirmation. William proposed a toast to family, to the support they had all provided through the years and would continue to provide going forward. Glasses were raised, voices murmured agreement, and Kate felt a wave of gratitude for these people who loved them, not because of their titles, but because of who they were. In the years ahead, when the pressure became too great and the scrutiny too intense, she would need to remember this moment, this reminder that beneath the crowns and ceremony, they were still fundamentally people with families who cared about them. After dinner, Kate and William finally had a few moments alone in their private sitting room. The crown came off immediately, placed carefully on a cushion but removed with obvious relief. Kate's hair was a disaster where the crown had pressed it down all day, but she was too tired to care. William loosened his collar and tie, sinking into a chair with a deep sigh. For the first time all day, they could simply be themselves. They sat in silence for a while, both too exhausted for conversation but finding comfort in each other's presence. Outside, Kate could hear celebrations continuing in the streets of London. Tomorrow the headlines would analyze every aspect of the ceremony, critique their performances, speculate about what the new reign would bring. But for tonight, the official duties were complete. They had survived their coronation day. Kate thought about everything that had happened, from the nervous preparations that morning to this moment of quiet relief. It felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else, yet her aching feet and tired muscles proved it was real. She was queen now. That title would follow her for the rest of her life, defining how people saw her, how they interacted with her, what they expected from her. It was both an honor and a burden, a privilege and a responsibility. William reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. No words were needed. They had shared this experience, stood together through every moment, and would continue to stand together through whatever came next. The challenges ahead would be significant. There would be political pressures, public scrutiny, family complications, and the constant balancing act of modernizing an ancient institution while respecting tradition. But they would face it all as partners, as they always had. Kate looked at the crown resting on its cushion, gleaming in the lamplight. Tomorrow she would put it on again for more official appearances. There would be photographs, interviews, thank you speeches, and countless other obligations. The coronation celebration would continue for days. But tonight she allowed herself to simply be tired, to acknowledge the enormity of what had occurred, and to feel both pride and relief that they had managed it well. In a few minutes, she would check on the children one last time before trying to sleep. She would kiss their foreheads, straighten their blankets, and whisper how proud she was of them. Then she would finally rest, knowing that when she woke, everything would be different. The coronation had changed them all fundamentally. George was no longer just a prince, but the heir to the throne. Charlotte and Louis had taken another step into public life. And she and William were king and queen, with all the history and expectation those titles carried. But for now, in this quiet moment, Kate simply held her husband's hand and let herself breathe. The crown could wait until morning. Tonight she was just Kate, tired and grateful, surrounded by love and ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring.